Today I am joined again by artist, writer, printmaker, podcaster, content dealer, unofficial co-host of the Break the Rules stream, gonzo philosopher, postmodern rightist, and Jungian futurist, Gio Pennacchietti. Welcome
Yes,
back.
hello. Halputler, Oh, oh, you should cut that one out. No,
We're going away.
Halputler.
Don't say something like that. Oh
Well,
man.
okay, my love starts every stream with Slava Ukraina, so I'm
Oh really?
Slava
Okay.
Z. Slava. No, no, cut it out. Cut it out.
I do not endorse. I do not endorse. Because to be honest,
Oh,
this has been like the subject that I got the most insane pushback on, and the most
what?
insane people like hunting me and trying to like. There's this one guy who kept respawning in different guises. And then it was just posting stuff
Oh
about me
God.
being a Putin shill under every post that either referenced me or that I made for like a week or something. It was
Whoa.
a bit strange. I
That's
think
the new
he,
because that's the new cancelable thing. That's probably what it
yeah,
is
yeah.
because
Did
it's
not align sufficiently with the
yeah.
current thing. I mean, I'm not pro Russia. You know, I'm not. I really don't think I can have a very serious opinion about what's going on with.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Ceausescu redacted how many of your own people, Alex? I don't. Can you
Yeah,
be pro? Can you? What does pro
no.
Russia mean in your context? What is that?
Yeah, you really can't be pro Russia. I mean, just living around here, you know, we're kind of wedged between empires. You know, Western
Yeah.
empires have always been a bit nicer to us. We've just been cannon fodder, and you know, just like I don't know, genocide meat for the Russian faction. So yeah, it's not been fun.
Oh.
No one really likes the Russians. You know, and that's why I can also say, you know, I'm not a bad person, guys. I'm just asking
Oh
questions
man.
here. Yeah.
That's the current thing. I mean, I think okay. My honest take is that as time goes on, of course, the natural contrarian impulse is to be like Halputler, because of the sort of the new current thing, which I think is absolutely disgusting and abominable. The way that the sort of media apparatus, this what would you say, the spectacle machine, has trivialized the very real um, damage in lives and in geopolitics. In Eastern Europe, that like go literally for centuries, this has been going on, not just with Russia, but also all of Eastern Europe. I mean, former Yugoslavia, say no more, right? I mean, Romania has
Yeah.
been in between empires for how many centuries, right? Like whether it was the
Since
Ottomans or the
inception, since the
Rus.
Romans. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the Romans, the Mongols, like
Yeah.
so I think it's very interesting how now that it's very indicative, I think, of the sort of pervasive Western colonialism, or I would say neo-colonialism in terms of culture, because now that we have to and this isn't my observation, this is people saying that the same sort of, let's say, American Floydism narrative,
Hmm.
now that is a very easy template to place upon the rest of the world in terms of any contested geopolitical issue. And you start to see the memes, and you start to see, and so I think this is what people were saying with the quote unquote marvelification of like Zelensky and the Ukrainians, and it's sort of whereas the Russian side has almost been completely absent by design. I mean, people have been banned and so forth, and news organizations redacted, but of course, like not to say I fully support whatever what the Russians are doing here, but I think that it is very interesting how our approach to very complex geopolitical issues, in some ways, is filtered through the same sort of uh, simulacra spectacle machine that everything else is, even though people are actually like really dying on the ground, and people are having their lives disturbed forever, and who knows how long this, if it will culminate in sort of like a North Korean situation, or if the Russians actually do win and they conquer the whole territory and they break up Ukraine and so forth. I mean, i I personally don't see any logical way that the Ukrainians, outside of NATO intervention, can like truly repel the Russians. I don't, because you can't. The thing is, you can't even believe the numbers that are being floated around, because the Russians will have their propaganda. No, we've lost nothing, but then you have like the whole they lost 40,000 troops in the span of 2 weeks, and it's like, you know what I mean. So I think
Yeah.
like it's very callous for like Western observers to make like to import their own like domestic politics into like a very complex geopolitical situation. Because of course, like if you actually take Putler's word for it, if you like watch that speech he gave, what was it called, Empire of Lies, there is like quite a huge contrast between the way that people think of things in Eastern Europe and the way that their history affects them, and this sort of like historyless, total, like, I wouldn't even say postmodern, but let's say the sort of like rootless neoliberal Washington machine going up there with Biden, who's like, as we know, half whatever out of it, saying like, well, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. And it's like very simplistic. But that being said, I mean, yeah, I think that people are making this observation. I know people have written about this in I Am 1776 and elsewhere, that like the real is sort of coming back, and it's like the virtual, the hyper real, that is sort of like the layer upon the real. And the real is like an actual, like, you know, Russian military intervention, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know. I think that, I mean, is the real coming back or not? That's, yeah, I'm rambling right now. I'm rambling. I'm trying to kayfabe my own, position, if you will. But like, you know, I mean, it's kind of obvious.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it's obvious because, like, to quote Anatoly, what's his last name? Karolin,
Carlin.
Karlin,
Carlin.
Karlin. Yeah,
Mhm.
he said like by the fact that you are like a quote unquote dissident, you are pretty much on the side of the Kremlin, or rather, it becomes a very easy sticking point to where it's like, you know, you're a Kremlin shell, I am a Kremlin shell. Um, Coach
Yeah.
Red Pill, by the way, I hope he's safe. At the time of recording, we don't know where he is, but I hope Coach Red Pill is safe. I know people who know him, and I think that, well, it's a terrible situation. But no, I think that by the virtue of the fact that you are a dissident in the quote unquote West, then it's like, yeah. But I think also it's sort of like the appeal of certain figures and certain like Eurasianist ideals. I think that that's another topic that we could cover, because I'm well, you go ahead, you go ahead. I'm just rambling right now. But yeah.
No, I mean it's the topic du jour, and
Yeah.
there's definitely a kind of a forced context collapse that we all have to participate in, where the side of good is the side of of absolute good, and the side of evil is the side of
Hmm.
absolute evil, and they're embroiled in this cosmic battle, and if you don't show allegiance to the cosmic battle, then you must be siding with the bad, and I guess like you said, kind of by default we have to side with the bad just because we will not side with show allegiance visible allegiance with absolute good as it's been presented
Yeah.
because we don't believe in the people presenting it. My fear with this whole thing is that because of this context collapse is I don't want to go the route of Richard Spencer and just wear the SS uniform and say, yeah, we are the baddies, and that's the whole thing, because I feel like this is also kind of one of those situations, because there's obviously been Russian aggression, there's a lot of suffering in Ukraine, which I don't want to underplay. There's literal
Hmm.
people losing their homes, being displaced. It's a messed up situation, and I feel for these people. What I don't believe is that some insane Hitler type character woke up one morning and decided
For
on a
no
whim
reason
to
at all.
no
Yeah.
reason at all, to
Yeah.
just go out and murder Ukrainian babies. Yeah, that's
Throwing
not
them out of the incubators. Yeah,
exactly
that's
throwing them out of
yeah.
incubators, using chemical weapons. Oh,
Well, it's
well,
funny
whichever.
you mentioned the Big Spence, because Big Spence has been the most pro
Yeah, yeah, indeed.
which I mean, okay, here's the thing. I believe someone more like I know this is gonna be like gossip, but like there is a certain faction of the online right who say that the Ukrainians are the actual base nationalists, because that's the certain few groups and the certain few paramilitary organizations in Ukraine, they wear that certain symbol of the certain sun. But
Yeah.
I think that someone like, for example, Greg Johnson, I believe, I to me he comes off as more sincere because he has been very pro-Ukrainian for many years, since 2008 at least, in Countercurrents. But someone like, Richard Spencer, when they temporarily banned Russians with Attitude, being like, finally the traitors are silenced. I
Mhm.
think that it is very interesting how there is a certain undercurrent to certain ideas of the right wing, like the pan-European stuff, for instance, which in an actual European context is kind of ridiculous. But I think that there is a certain strain which can lead almost like it can become a very like um reverse polarity of like the prevailing sort of like NATO EU liberal order. And it's almost like what me and Mary Harrington were talking about once, where you end up with very like strange conglomerations of ideas that manifest into like their opposite. For example, the what I call the Paul to R9K pipeline, where she was talking about, she got like brutally ratioed for this take one time. This was a year ago, where she talked about how like a certain, that certain subset of people in the gender ideology, how a lot
Mhm.
of them started off as like very far right people, some of them actually, but then they end up becoming the certain spectrum of the certain typology, if you know, I'm trying to use code words for YouTube purposes. But I was explaining to her how on in Chan culture, how the ideas of Paul, politically incorrect, which we all know is like the meme, Paul Nazi, Paul Cell, blah blah blah. But how that those ideas can manifest into like a very like extreme form of misogyny. Right?
Mhm.
Now you have R9K, which is, people don't know, the R9K was called the robot board, the containment board. It's basically, it was designed for the green text threads, which people know famously
Mhm.
are like the feels threads, right? But what happened over time is that R9K became this containment board for like the neat, the incel, the sort of, let's say, gender ambiguous, um, the
Mhm.
trap, quote unquote. So you have this like weird colonization of Paul thinking, especially in terms of gender relations.
Mhm.
Then you have this fact where it's like, what, and Mary was talking about this as well, where it's like, I can't become the girlfriend I want, the trad waifu Wheatfield girl. I can't have that, so I become that, if you know what I mean.
Mhm. Yeah,
And they
yeah.
have it, so it's like this like with a certain element of that certain spectrum or typology, if you will,
Mhm.
by that certain thinker, Blanchard. Then
Mhm.
when you have this sort of like mix of like right wing misogyny plus like having a sort of very like divorced picture of your own masculinity, and then you also have this environment of like, or rather I should say, this crab bucket of extreme emotivism, you you end up with like a very different picture of the like let's say internet trans person than
Mhm.
you would normally. And of course, she was brutally ratioed by the people with Picker Avies and the flags and the bios and so forth. But no, I think we live in strange times. And so I think figures like Richard Spencer, I mean, uh, that is just one example of where certain wires get crossed, and you can end up through very like marginalized politics, you can end up defending certain things that are quite interesting. Like, I mean, the fact that he's gone full bore on the NATO Ukrainian thing. It's like, I mean, of course, the other explanation is that, well, we all, not to accuse people of anything, but I think we live in interesting times. There is certainly a section of the right who is very pro-Ukrainian, or rather, very pro a certain interpretation of the Ukrainian cause. But um, when it comes to the Russian thing, I think that, and this is my last point because I'm just rambling right now. I think that I was talking about this actually, ironically enough, on Break the Rules with Jonathan Kay, of all people, who is, for people who don't know, Jonathan Kay is well, he's like a Quillette person now, but I grew up with him because he's Canadian. He's a Canadian journalist, like, hardcore Zionist, hardcore, like, centrist lib.
Yeah, his mom is a journalist as well, isn't she?
Oh, you're thinking of David Frum.
No, I think Jonathan Kay, he works for Quillette, no?
Yes,
I
yes.
think his mom's like a big name journalist as well. I don't know. Maybe I'm mistaking,
Oh,
but
I hope you're not confusing her with Barbara Kay because they don't have no relation to each other. But
no? Oh, okay. Doesn't
yeah,
matter.
yeah, I know people get confused all the time with that. Because like, see, I grew up like reading the National Post because of my old man, so this is like inborn Canadian stuff, right? And Jonathan Kay was like the token lib at the National Post, but now
Mhm,
over time, he's taken on some very, very quote unquote based positions. But
mhm,
we were talking about this in terms of what is the appeal of something like Eurasianism on the online right in particular. And he was like, well, it's because if you are someone in the political left of things, in the sort of the current neoliberal order, then you are given a number of how did he put it? You're given a number of identity frameworks that are sort of like palliatives, if you will, for your own alienation. So you're given either like if you're lucky enough, if you're blessed enough in Canada to be a certain percentage of Indigenous person, then you are given a sort of easy template to consume of what he said. What did he call it? Like a certain indigeneity, right? Um, or you're given, of course, like the trans thing is well, especially in certain sectors of the economy, it's quite interesting how the way that it's thought about is like, especially if you're alienated from your own masculinity, then it's a very easy sort of consumable good that can come about to fulfill certain needs. Or the feminist thing, the Black Lives Matter. Let's call it Floydism. Floydism is a good term for it. But if you were in the political right, you were given nothing. No, nothing. You deserve it. Actually, you deserve your own alienation, and you are there. There are templates that were created in house, right? But they, of course, are subject to policing, negative normalization, surveillance, biopower. So the incel thing, the right wing bodybuilder, the homesteader, you go down the list, right? Like extreme racist anime person, like but those things are just they're self-created. They don't have the support. There is not going to be, maybe in the future, who knows, there will be like back in the day, back in the early 2000s, they had the oxygen bars. Do you remember this?
No,
The
no.
oxygen bar. Oh, come on, you tech
Oh, no.
person back.
Oh, no, no. The oxygen bar is like where
Yeah.
you would go and have oxygen from a
Yes.
tank.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was like a candy bar. I was like, no.
No, no. They
No,
have other
yeah,
forms
that's
of bars with drugs in
very
that, but
retarded, yeah.
no, the tech people loved it. I had a professor actually. He was like my mentor, and he was my supervisor, my MA supervisor. And he used to go every morning before a lecture. He was like, "Oh yeah, you're juiced up." We had a lecture on the Fido, or we had a lecture on Derrida. He's like, you go. So I think in the future, who knows, there will be ball tan sun test there will be a junk tanning salons in the future where you do the pose and you have like the handlebars to do the pose, and maybe yeah, maybe there'll be something. But for now for now anyways, I think that the identities, the identity templates you're offered at most is like the Jordan Peterson, not even that, not even that's cast with suspicion, but like, the Jordan Peterson, clean up your room, self improvement, eat
Yeah.
steak. Yeah, like the signifiers, like the Reddit, like having like beard grease and bacon, like that I think is probably like the template, right? But you're given very few options. And so then we were talking about how and he knew like right away. I was actually shocked because this is a lib, right? He's not actually like a lib in like the pejorative, but
Yeah.
he's like, well, the Russian thing is interesting because now you have this sort of um exporting of Eastern European politics and ideas that, and people don't know this, but this is, not just, can we say his name, Alexander Dugin?
Mm.
Not not just Dugin, but there's a tradition in Russia of the cosmicists and so forth, right? But I think that Dugin and the new Nouveau Droit in France, they become now this sort of exo or outsider politics for North American, in particular, right wing people, because they offer a template where you can embrace a sort of level of ethno nationalism, but not too explicitly. Like that's Dugin's thing, right? Like a lot of people in
Yeah.
the political right who are like hardcore white nationalists, they
He's not racist. I think that's
no,
what people really
so
don't
people
like
don't.
about Dugan. He's like, "What the hell,
Yeah,
man?"
but then of course, I mean, if you are someone who is of a certain persuasion politically on the right, like you get accused of being a Dugan shill, right? Like Keith Woods is an Islamo Duganist or whatever. My friend Joel Davis, I am an Islamo. This is why. Look, my fez is not just to cover up my Norwood hair, but it's also a symbol of my Islamo Duganism. No, but I I think that the template that's offered from there is like you can escape the white nationalist politics of America, which is not a very good pass. Let's put it to put it mildly, right? But
Yeah, of
also
course.
you can sort of embrace a position of like being a person on the right who doesn't like capitalism because again in North America the sort of suffocating political terms around economics in particular, I think that is another reason why people like they go on to read Evola or Serrano or Dugan. It's like there is this sort of romanticism of embracing thinkers even like in where you're from in Romania, it's like if you're a hardcore trad, you're gonna read Marcia Eliade, which I have all of his books. If you're a hardcore, nihilist that wants to escape the Reddit nihilism of Banatar and Harari, what's the guy's name? Even
Yuval Noah Harari.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Which let's face it, it's just nihilism at the end of the day with extra steps. Um, um, if you want to escape that, you read the real romanticism of Cioran, which I also have every Cioran book. Um,
Ooh, good.
right, because that's the thing. Yeah, they're the sort of like I would say there's a term that nobody TM came up with, the famous visual artist that I was affiliated with for many years. Um, psychic goring, where you sort of you desensitize yourself on a psychic and intellectual and spiritual level to open yourself up to thinkers that are very much outside of the box. But then the problem, I think, is that that becomes another sort of shelling point for a consumer identity because now it's like the legions of redditors that read Noah Harari as opposed to like the small minority that read Miguel Serrano or Julius Evola. Well, even Evola's passe now. Now it's whoever, right? It's Burnham and Haller or
Juvenile.
whoever. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's like I think that unfortunately it's just the nature of the way that these identities are constructed and the way that the internet has enabled a certain direction of discourse itself on a very meta level that unfortunately opens itself up to creating what our good friend Catherine D would call the fandom aspect of current reality and identity. So that's a lot. I've spurred out long enough, Alex. What do you think about
No,
that?
I think it's very correct, and I think the concept of fandoms is quite strangely invading every space. I mean, I can kind of even see it in just interacting with my mom. I can see her being just fangirling over all sorts of concepts that float in. She's like someone who's born in the '60s and like communist Romania, and still
Oh,
all
there
this
you go.
stuff is
Yeah.
but the thing that I wanted to chat to you most about, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit, is this article that you wrote recently after a minor, I think, period of maybe touching grass or just being a
Yeah,
little bit
yeah. I
more.
was I was gone for 2 weeks after I was accused of vicious blackpilling by people. So I decided to take the first time I ever took one in like years, a Twitter break, just a temporary sort of you know,
Yeah, and you
yeah.
came back with refreshed energies and then vitalism, and you wrote this epic article and kind of declaring your intention to become the chronicler of the movement of La Cosa Nostra of
This thing
what
of ours, as our good friend
exactly.
Thomas 777 would say. Wow, you're putting a lot of weight on my shoulders. I'm starting to think that like
No, no,
like that's the
I'm
thing. I'm worried that I'm gonna like screw up in some ways that I'm not
you
gonna like.
will, but that's fine. You know,
Yeah,
it's an attempt at
yeah.
something, and you're one of the people who's been around for longer than most. I mean, I've
Hmm.
been in the space for maybe a year and a bit. You know, most people maybe a few years. You've kind of seen, you've been producing content, immersing yourself in these ideas with these people for a long time, and you've
Almost
seen
10
things
years. Yeah,
change.
since
Yeah.
2014, actually. Yeah,
Oh
that's.
man, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you are a veteran, 5 times over.
Oh,
Um,
the oldest of old F slurs. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
but that's the thing. I was on the internet as well, back then, but in a very much more minor capacity. I was just posting pictures of myself being extremely covered in self tanner in college, and it was
I think I
just
read some of those old Vice articles.
oh Lord, no. Yeah, they were
Yeah.
really bad. I mean, they were essentially, they were written to a certain recipe. You actually get the Gonzo book given once they induct you into Vice. You have to read Gonzo,
Oh,
the
really? I
Huntress
didn't know
Thompson book.
that.
Yeah,
Wow.
but then they make you write listicles, so I don't know. Maybe it was different when they
Oh,
started, under Gavin McInnes, under the tutelage
Gavin,
of Saint Gavin.
yeah,
Um,
it was just Gavin, Shane, and that other guy, right? Yeah.
yeah, the South Asian man. I
Yes,
don't
the
know his name.
subcon, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So where was I?
Well, you
Yeah, I
said
was
your
just
mother.
cringing over my
Yeah.
time
Oh
advice.
man, some of those photos were good though. I gotta say they were
Oh
good.
yeah,
The hat one, that was great. I love that one. That
remember
was
some
see, people accuse you of thirst trapping or whatever because you your photo
catfishing,
doesn't reflect.
catfishing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
catfish.
I mean, to be honest, I don't take as many glamorous shots as I should, and I don't update much because the
Hmm.
reality is, I used to look better before I had a baby,
I
and I'm
mean,
not. So,
that's, I mean,
sorry,
come on,
friends.
that's, yeah. No, I think that women who've had children, they have a different type of beauty to them. Not like,
Thank
you
you.
know what I mean? Like the beauty of youth, I hate to say it, especially for women, is fleeting, right? But
Oh
I
yeah, oh
think
yeah.
it's funny because me and my good friend Matthew, we actually we recorded our podcast style talks where we mostly talk about art aesthetics, and we were talking about the Elon Musk thing, and it got onto the topic of the beautiful boy archetype and how Camille Paglia talks about the beautiful boy and how there's sort of like a dark romanticism to it. But when the beautiful boy grows up, then it's sort of like that charming sadism, if you will, that sort of fades. And I feel like when you grow up as someone who definitely is not a beautiful boy, who's, I think that it's quite interesting, like the sort of male perception of uh, beauty, right? In a male sense, as opposed to like the woman, because I feel that like it is true that a woman can reflect a certain amount of beauty at different stages of life, but it seems that women are only given one particular picture of like what beauty means, and so it leads to a lot of different, I would say, schizophrenic contradictions. Because the beauty of a mother, maybe it doesn't have like the immediate sex appeal of a woman in her 20s or whatever. That, but at the same time, I feel that there is a different form, but it's just that I don't know, the discourse around it is kind of like
Yeah,
I
I feel it's
understand it, but
yeah,
it
it's
yeah,
contextual. The thing
yeah.
is,
But it's like
humans
you're
are
you're a roasty, you hit the wall, like all that
yeah,
stuff.
I mean,
You
humans are
know?
relational people, and if you
Yeah.
really just think about, the dating marketplace, who's who's mid, who's like a 5,
Yeah.
who's a
Oh, the
10,
mid thing.
who
Yeah,
can
the
get with
mid thing.
whom, like women only
Yeah.
want the top 1%. And if you're in that like spreadsheet mindset, then yeah, of course I'm a 5.7 on a Tuesday, and maybe I'm a 6 on a Wednesday, and
But
depends
really
what
work
lighting I
hard.
get and stuff like that. Like, yeah, I mean,
Uh,
within that framework, yeah, I
Depending on how
understand.
much or less the baby's crying, and maybe I'll reach a 6 right that week.
Yeah, it's
Um,
I also can I've been on the internet enough and in these spaces enough to not not take it that personally, but
no, you
it's
can't. You can't. It's
no,
impossible.
but it's
Like
I mean,
it's yeah.
yeah, it is the currency of the realm, but at the same time, there's the thing that kind of, again, I come back to my shtick with liberalism, the thing that kind of was stolen from us. I mean, call it liberalism, call it essentially emergent from the technology that enabled us to get to this point. But it is kind of the reduction to this type of relationality where,
Hmm.
what can I do with my body? What resources can I access with my body that are non-relational? Like
Right.
that, what can I get from a guy on in one night, and that is
Yeah.
maximized when I'm a perfect 10. And that's, I'm my capital. That is my capital. My youth is my capital. How much attention I can get online. I can make money through that. And so everything's kind of,
Yeah.
reduced to that. But now, we don't really have a concept for like what is the beauty of a mother. A mother might look really shitty from a 1 to 10 scale
Well,
complex, but
it depends. Actually, there is a huge market for
oh yeah,
fetishizing
true
sexually the
indeed. Yeah,
mother.
there's a
Right.
different, that's a different thing.
That's a different. Go
Yeah,
into
I'm
that if
sure.
you want. I mean,
I'm
that's
sure there's parallel submarkets that I could
the
start
mommy TF thing.
entering.
That's yeah. You could be
Yeah.
like Liz Brunegg and post certain photo.
Oh God,
That
no, no.
by the way, like Amy was 100% right. You know what the hell she was doing with that one. We all know the very like frustrated condition of the average DNC male feminist. I mean, well, which is kind of funny though. I think like Liz Brunig is like fascinating in the sense. Well, she's not fascinating in terms of writer, in my opinion, but like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. But
No, I don't know. I to be
she's
honest, I haven't
fascinating
read
in
as much as as most people probably have because she's been around for a while. But
she's
I love
fascinating.
her
Go
cookies,
ahead. Go.
and there's I don't
Yeah.
know. She's always been nice to me. To be honest, I never
No,
had
I know.
a
Yeah.
conflict with her. You
It's
know.
just a meme. I feel like a lot of people, like, especially, I remember like back in the day, used to
Yeah.
post like the bodybuilders, like Liz, what think of this? But I think it's fascinating, like how you have like, in some ways, like this is the absolute gutter subversion of like left Catholicism in the sense that you have like this weird interjection of what traditionally has been like the realm of like the political right, which is like maternity, motherhood, the sort of perspective of fertility, but yet injected into like progressive left politics, which very much nowadays is like antinatalist and the exact opposite of fertility. I mean, and I think like someone who is very much on the outside of like a lot of what people talk about. For obvious reasons, I'm on the outside of like what these like sort of like dating discourse and like sexual market, like even the term sexual marketplace is like an instrumentalization and economization of like human relations, which people like the sort of one response is like, yes, like that's the brutal reality that you have to face, man, because that's the way it is with hypergamy, which there is a lot to that. But the other side is like, are we willing to reduce ourselves down to the position of the libidinal economy where everything is like instead of in exchange for money, although of course there's a lot of that as well, as we know.
Yeah.
It's this sort of like weird libidinal exchange and sort of like the affirmation of the Freud would call like the sexual organism, right? Like there
Yeah,
is,
to me, this
yeah.
feels just like the arguments, like for rape, like rape is
Oh God.
no, it's incredibly
Oh,
common in nature. It's incredibly common in our
yeah,
history, and the fact that
yeah.
it's extremely natural, like the fact that some girls hit puberty at 11, and maybe they should get married and stuff like that. Okay, but maybe there is a certain role that culture can play in this, and I think it has the same type of mediating effect on the rampant hypergamy and the rampant
Yeah, yeah.
quest for a younger model or whatever you want to see that the male equivalent could be. Yeah, it's
Yeah, what is the male equivalent is weird, because if you're going by mainstream culture, then the beautiful boy is definitely a very powerful one. But if you're going by, like, I guess, what would you call it, dissident culture, like the right wing bodybuilder is like the ideal, like the Giga Chad.
Yeah, but he's feels to me like a very sterile type figure. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I haven't. I've read Bronze Age mindset. I've kind of been in these spaces for a while, but it feels to me like there's kind of an end point to that. It feels almost a bit too liberal for me. It's like a bit of a kind of a
Oh
lib
no!
adventure fantasy.
Oh,
It's like
I gotta
it's a
clock
bit
out
of
of
a
this
power
podcast
trip.
right now. I'm gonna get so much heat for this. But no,
No,
go ahead.
no.
Go. What do you
Maybe
mean by it? Like,
I just mean like it feels a bit like a kind of kind of like this. I don't know. Maybe I don't understand. Again, I'm not. I only read the book once. Maybe I didn't get it. Could
I
be.
know that there's critics. Go. You finish your point.
No,
I'm
but I'm
very
just
sorry.
thinking. Like to me, it feels like obviously there is. It's an acknowledgement of forces that have completely been ignored and suppressed in our culture that
Right.
need to be acknowledged. But it feels to me like, okay, once you acknowledge those forces, they're not really integrated into what next. And I also feel like this is like it's kind of it's not supposed to be an instruction manual. It's just it's
Right.
almost kind of a conjuring of those
Well,
forces.
like
And
Zarathustra. That's what Baps has essentially.
exactly. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
understand that, but I feel like, because there is no instruction manual attached to it, it does tend to like feel like a bit of a kind of a Nietzschean Übermensch LARP to a point
You
because
can
it's like,
graft on an
yeah,
instruction
you can
manual
exactly. I
or a
mean,
cookbook to some people. That's yeah.
maybe, maybe. So because there's no maybe there shouldn't be a clear way. I mean, the thing with
Hmm.
Nietzsche is that he looked into the abyss so long that it stared back at him, and then he died quite insane and destroyed by his own. Maybe not destroyed, but kind of um, consumed to a husk by his realizations.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe that's the conclusion, and maybe you should just go out in a blaze of glory, tanning your balls, and just like be a pirate conqueror, Giga Chad, and have 1,000 babies that you never hear of, or none at all, or who knows exactly what
Run
you're
armed
doing.
shipments in Eastern Europe. They
Could be,
could be.
So I mean, maybe that's the I'm a woman. I represent the longhouse. I want babies. I want my house. I want to make cinnamon buns. Barefoot in my garden, like
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Doesn't really fit with the pirate conqueror vision of the world. So
Right.
maybe that's why I'm like,
I think like the archetype, it's very fun. Like, by the way, I'm not accusing anyone of running arms in Eastern Europe, by the way. That's just it's
okay,
I was watching
oddly
recently.
particular.
Yeah, no, there's no one in particular. It was funny though, because I was watching a lot of documentaries on what happened in Eastern Europe, um, particularly with certain paramilitary organizations like the White Eagles, or like what the one that Archon ran, the Scorpions. I think like there's a certain level of, again, like the fetishism for Eastern European politics is very interesting from a right wing perspective, because it's like you hear these stories of like the horrors of sexual terrorism and so forth, and you sort of have this uh like paramilitary groups trooping around Bosnia, and it's like there's something there's some sort of like a dark affectation to something. And I think that in the terms of like the mainstream media now, of course, the narrative is that Putler is basically Slobodan Milosevic, right? Like that's the thing.
Mhm.
But in terms of answering your question, I mean, there's a lot of like anons on Twitter or wherever, on Telegram. If you go to Telegram, it's even more of an abyss. That joke about like especially the wow, I should say no more, but like it happened
I
recently.
don't know.
Apparently, my good friend 0 HP Lovecraft went after this journalist or whatever, this sexual health expert, and
Mm.
some of the
Yeah,
discourse. I mean,
at
it's just
Mediclit.
joke. Yeah, yeah. Some of the Clintondectomy discourses. I know it's ironic, but there's something about where because we live in an intensely, I would like kind of feel like, I guess this is all just manosphere discourse, right? But like, because we do live in an intensely gynocentric political discourse, if you will, and we're seeing how the way in which women in particular have certain affects and certain ways of expressing themselves and expressing collective group cohesion that are becoming like the political model of very complex issues. The extreme ironic but still extreme nevertheless retort to that is like, let's, female internment camps or whatever, like that's, we got to punch the roasties. It's like, so, but that is like an ironic sort of like LARP, and like it's, you shouldn't really take it seriously, at least. Well, I'm saying stuff that'll get me in trouble, but like,
the
you
fact
could
that
take
you'd
it
never know if you can take it seriously is
exactly. That
part
is
of the
the
fun,
point.
to be honest. Yeah.
That's the point. You never know if you could take it seriously.
To be honest, like I love Zero HP Lovecraft so much that he could just, be shit posting about me personally for a month, and I would still follow him, and I'm still a big fan. He's written enough amazing stuff on that website that no one, and I say no one, can compare
Exactly.
to. That give the guy some credit. I will never,
but I think that,
reject him.
I think that there is sort of a mental affectation. Let me answer your question about BAP very earnestly, even if it might get me in trouble, because BAP has always been good to me, and for that I admire him because of my Ignatius J. Riley disposition, right? I mean, I don't. I'm not the archetype of the right wing bodybuilder by any stretch of the imagination. I think that there is a certain need to reject the longhouse thinking, if you will. There is a certain affectation by which modern politics is spread that is very alien to a lot of traditional discourse, and I feel that in the sense that you have to really, to understand, and this is controversial, to understand the Bappian disposition, you have to understand modern womanhood in some ways, in the sense that the picture of the gynocratic nature of political and cultural discourse is, in my opinion, a very distorted picture of womanhood as well, right? Like it's a very narrow and specific version of especially the young woman. But see, the young woman is now a subject of colonization by the quote unquote wine mom, used up post wall roasty, right? Whatever pejorative you want to say. It's like the idea of the young woman. There's this great book. I know it's total theory cell, but my good friend Impossible Princess, she recommended this. It's called Preliminary Materials Towards the Theory of the Young Girl, where the young girl becomes this archetypal ideal, and it becomes within like capitalist realism, let's say, it becomes this source of weird power, even though it's initially was sold as a sort of helplessness and feminine powerlessness that is tied to the particular male form of eroticism, and that's very problematic. Multiple Susan Sontag essays on that one, but what I mean is that the Bappian view of it as a counterpoint to that is the idea of the Hellenistic beautiful body being a symbol of conquest, and but a very fugitive conquest, not the conquest of empires, because as we know, empires descend into the Longhouse as well. It is rather the pirate, the expat, the sort of you know there's a lot of like very romantic images you can conjure, but I think that the reason there is this tension between a traditionalist understanding that is very pro-natal and very pro-family and very religious in character and Bappian vitalism is that inevitably there's going to be a conflict there, because it's like on the one hand, Bap is very ambiguous when it comes to his own religious affiliation, right? I mean, there was this tweet the other day that, of course, a lot of Christian trads were offended by, where he's like, I will impose state Buddhism. We shall get rid of all Semitic religions except for, the most edgy right-wing, interpretation of Christianity, Jesus as, Christ as Son of God. And, the priest class will be over toppled and all that stuff. But the thing is, like, I know it's edgy and it's like, ironic or whatever, but like there is something to be said about how what BAP is saying at least I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but rather I think what he's getting at is that the idea of a religious centric form of natalism is in some ways a barrier of overthrowing the condition of modernity, because you are tied fundamentally to a self-contained structure, or at least the way it manifests in the modern world. Because the family meant something very much. There's a great book actually published by Imperium Press on this subject. The ancient family is much different than what we consider as family now. It's very much a clan structure. But nowadays we are forced to, unless you have a community of people that you're willing to live with, you're forced in some ways to, if you want a family, if you want to be pronatal, to conforming to a confined atomistic sort of picture of the family. Because like you said this in your podcast as well, like, that when you had a kid, you felt alienated because all your friends, they're still like, London socialites that work in tech, and that they, you know what I mean? Like, so you have a different set of priorities. And so I think that's why there's a conflict there, because there is a religious, especially Christian based form of natalism. And there is this sort of Bappian vitalism, which preaches a very, very much of a life as an anarch, if you will, right? But which is crazy, because Ernst Jünger is the ultimate anarch, but yet I know he had like 5 kids or something like that. I forget how many kids he had, but yeah, it's like I think that you can solve these contradictions, but the problem is we don't live in a time that has a tradition which informs the reconciliation between the man as a source of vitalistic power that is a conqueror, and the man of the family. I think that like that's why I think they obsess with Liz Brusnig, because it's like this weird leftist appropriation of the family, which is kind of crazy. And you have to like basically butcher Catholicism or Protestantism to do that. But anyways, I hope
Yeah.
this makes sense, Alex. I don't know if I'm just
No,
rambling right
no.
now.
I think that's right, and I think that's a very very valid criticism. You kind of have to be a bit anarchic yourself to make this choice, just in the sense that you really are uprooting yourself from pretty much anything, and you're kind of going at it alone, literally, because
Right.
most people are far from family. We've tried to kind of plug back into family. It's complicated. Obviously, it comes with its own issues, but I think a lot of people tend to ascribe too much value to theory, to philosophy, to the
Mm-hmm.
ideas that powered all of this, when this is essentially all downstream from essentially affluence and tech mediated, just a possibility, like the welfare state. Medieval welfare state, good luck. There's just the excess
Yeah.
has powered all of this stuff. We are able to not live in multi-generational homes because that's a revealed preference, as they say in economics. People want to live alone. People want to be atomized. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Until they
Yeah.
realize that it's a hellish existence. But then do they have the powers to bootstrap themselves back into something functional? Maybe
Right.
that just comes with need, and maybe that's we're kind of in the Spenglerian cycle back to need, because we're fucking everything up again. So you know maybe we
That
won't be atomized for long.
maybe that'll be like I think like there's a number of thinking that goes into that. I think that, well, BAP would say that the welfare, like it's funny because BAP does have a lot of like American conservative affectations, because like he grew up like listening to Michael Savage and stuff like that. And I think like he's very harshly critical of the welfare state for good reasons, because the American, and even to extent the Canadian welfare state, is a total nightmare. But like I think that there is sort of like an idea of communitarian involvement that is very particular to the European mind. And what BAP would say is, um, you're not afforded the open space to become your own self, right? That's the big problem. And what they give you instead is a palliative to that. They give you sort of like a very easy consumerist identity. But when it comes to like welfare politics, for instance, there is like certain white nationalists who talk about how, like, okay, if we live in a society where people are absolutely being devastated by the opioid crisis, where people are sort of losing their jobs for a variety of reasons, like, the last current thing of the last 2 years, we all know why. If people are being invaded by like, what does Bab say? The genetic trash of the world, then God, oh, that's terrible. But no, but like let's face it, the immigration levels that they want within Europe and North America. I mean, let's face it, it's basic Cloward Piven, depress and break all institutions to the point of like being bursting at the seams, right? So you have all of these pressures on the sort of like European phenotype that they're saying, well, maybe it is true that there has to be some form of like social welfare in order to compensate. Like, for example, I live in a country that our basic religious identity is our universal healthcare system, and it's getting progressively shittier by literally by the month, right? But I do feel that some form of at least a public option is something that is in keeping with a lot of different ideas that were born from a lot of different, very uniquely European ways of doing things. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think, you can't really go back because, all of
No,
these things, the state, the market, the atomization, they've developed in tandem and they feed off each other. Like, for
exactly.
example,
Exactly.
back in the day, a lot of the people who are homeless on the street and shooting up fentanyl had a certain support structure. They had family, they had, uncles, aunts, they were in a
Right.
smaller community. Someone would have, pulled them back from the brink, locked them in the basement for 2 weeks and, got them off the sauce or something like that. Would have, at least housed them somewhere or offered them, a kind word or taken them to church. But that was still within the structure where you couldn't really opt out of family because family was your insurance. Family was, where
Right.
everyone got
Right.
food. You were maybe involved in subsistence agriculture as pretty much everyone was for the longest time. The state couldn't have been this big because there wasn't the excess coming off the market, and there wasn't the atomization that was fueled by the market by allowing everyone to have their own house, allowing everyone to have enough of an income to actually fund the pension funds that give you a safety net. So all of this
Right.
stuff happened in tandem, and
And
now
forced urbanization and all that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Urbanization. I mean, in Romania, a lot of cities were literally formed 50 years ago to fuel,
Yeah.
the industrialization of communism. Now,
Yeah. The Soviets came and said, well, you have to you have to be in brutalist apartment blocks now,
oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, just straight from subsistence farming straight into the brutalist block. Yeah.
But no, but that's the thing. That's like I know, like for example, in Canada here, we have a unique situation in that if you go outside of the cities, there is like majority original like anglophone and francophone is confined to like one part of the country more or less, but there's still that original sort of anglophone plus the European immigrants that came here in from the post-war period or even the between war period, which my father's family came from that era. So but in the big cities you have very unique pressures in terms of like a bunch of boomers that are retiring that are like basically invading where I live. I live in the Niagara region, right? So you have like, say you get rid of your apartment in Toronto, you come down here, you buy your McMansion, and then you harass all the local vineyard people because their equipment is too loud or whatever, right? Like but then you also have the reality of like housing is almost impossible for a young person now in Canada. Um, so and you also have immense immigration pressure because of course first post-national country we have to like it's part of our strength, right? It's our religious obligation according to Justin Trudeau. And the Liberal Party as a whole. I'm not talking about the Liberal Party as a whole, in from his father, or rather, I should say, from his stepfather on.
Oh,
His stepfather.
promoting conspiracy theories on this show.
I know, terrible, right? um, but no, I from Pierre onwards, this sort of like state ideology of multiculturalism. I wrote a very big piece recently on the trucker thing that's going to appear in a book that's organized by our good friend Bill Marchant. I think it's called Ending Bigly 2, but about like Trudeau. And it's like 30 pages. It's a big thing. I talk about what I call the Canada model of multiculturalism. But so you have these immense pressures, right? Within the sort of the originary, well, not the indigenous, but rather the the indigenous people, they have their own unique pressures as well, and there's a lot of issues there. But in terms of like the European stock that came over here, there is sort of like a lot of unique pressures, and especially towards young people. So when you have a system like universal health care that eats up, like in Ontario, I think it's like approaching almost 60% of all tax revenue, like some insane number like that. So but you have these systems that come from what you're saying, this sort of like rootless neoliberal like end of history state where people's basic needs are taken care of more or less, or they're taken care of very poorly, but they're sort of like, because these traditional systems have been eroded, as we all know, the state has to come in and take over. And like I'm not, I was a libertarian for many years. Thank God I
Weren't
got
we
out of
all?
that. Yeah, where we are, right? Where we are. But I think that there is something to be said of like the necessity of the state to take over. Now, to me, it's not the libertarian, oh, we have to get rid of the state, but it's rather because we have a lot of like dead zones within society in terms of human relations, in terms of our own sense of self, in terms of, you know, domestic politics. It's like you almost need something to come along and fill the void, because if you don't, then you have a lot of like precariat and destitute people. But
Yeah.
I think that what people don't realize is that you almost, by necessity, the system has to have these precariat and destitute people. And this is the basic, like, you know, Foucauldian biopolitics thing, right? In that, especially like, look at a state like California, where the homelessness issue is like, you know, approaching like third world favela level, right? You know, my mother, uh, we're genetically we're Italian, as you know, Calabrese, but my family, my mother's side of the family, most of them, they were expats to Brazil since at least World War One. So my family's been there for a very long time in Sao Paulo, and my mother was born and raised there. Her first language is Portuguese, and you know, Brazil, I think is like a very good shelling point for like what we're experiencing here now, because a lot of the same pressures we have, it's in Brazil, but only it's like magnified because of their population, right? So um you have a society that's on the edge, but you have certain elements within that society which are very well off, as we know. But when it comes to the population, when it comes to the favelization of urban centers in particular, because a lot of people, they don't choose to go out to the north of Brazil, the Amazonia, because living out there is like, unless you're some like indentured slave to a mining company, it's like it's abysmal, right? It's terrible. So in America, North America, the reason why this idea of like what they call like the sort of third worldization or favelization, it's kind of apt, but it isn't, because in Brazil they still have a sense of like a strong national unity, right? Like they still have a strong identity, which I mean in some ways kind of hinders them from realizing the real problems. But I think that now you have a situation where there's a lot of destitute people, but you have like a pervasive rootlessness. You have like sort of there was this one journalist that said that Canada was the best motel in the world, the best
Yeah.
motel, a nation as a motel,
Yeah,
right?
I call it the airport loungification of the
Ex-
world. Yeah,
the guy that
it's
lived in the airport, that yeah, yeah. I think like that's because the non-place, like you know the book by what's his name, Og, right? The non-place, you know that.
no, no.
Well, he wrote this book called The Non-Place, where it's a very popular idea because a lot of like internet aesthetics, like Reddit stuff, like Reddit subreddits, they have like, you know, liminal spaces, you know, that stuff. They have the music, they have the image compilations. I There's something within the millennial psyche in particular that is very attuned to this nostalgia for the non-place. So the non-place is like um the zones of ambiguity. It The zone that a particular form of modernity produced. That's pure functionality. So you have like in the city, you have doctors' offices, you have bus terminals, you have airports, right? You have the space in between the airports where you go. It's like this thing. Um, because modernity, or rather a certain form of like westernized neoliberal modernity, um, our approach to social services and our approach to daily activity in urban settings has manifested into a lot of zones that don't have what Heidegger called dwelling. So Martin Heidegger wrote this very good essay called, what's it called? I have it right here actually. Was it Thinking, Being, Dwelling? Let's see. I can't believe I forgot the name. Building dwelling thinking, where a place has a form of dwelling that is intimately tied to its culture, its people, its activity, its significance, right? But dwelling comes after building. But what we have nowadays in modernity is the non-place, where there is sort of a hub of activity that doesn't belong to anyone because by design it is a public utility. It is something that doesn't have a particular significance, right? In terms of one's culture and one's activity and one's being, one's family structure. So now that we're surrounded by non places, now whole government structures become non places. Canada is the best non place nation in the world. We are literally what Trudeau called the post national country, meaning that we don't have a particular identity from which we can dwell within our own space because now we're a space to the world, right? Like an
Yeah.
airport. So the non place has become a very good operational model for understanding what we're experiencing in modernity, um, which is sad and terrible because there is a sort of like aesthetic appeal to them, but at the same time, the sort of they're an anti aesthetics because they're just
Yeah.
designed purely for utility. They're the IKEA furniture section. I remember watching this documentary. It was some kind of like architectural thing where they had these like in the middle of Denmark, I think they had these like urban like cone apartments that looked like a hexagon, right? But it was like right in the middle of the street, and literally your front door goes out to the main like metropolitan street, right? Like there's no separation there. There's no like in New York you have like the brownstones with like the front
Mm-hmm.
yard, right? Or in London you have the council flats. It's like to me it was so strange because you have this like space which should be a place of dwelling, which should be a home, but it's in the middle of the non-place of the public square. So it's like this weird like it is your home but it isn't your home, it's just a utility sort of thing.
Literal cone pods. Ugh.
Yeah, there you go, the pod thing, exactly. It's like it is your home but it isn't, it's just your place of occupation
Yeah.
temporarily. And I think
That's
like
the essence of Reddit, you know? It's just
yeah.
everything is just there to be used by you, the homunculus in the meat suit.
Yeah, like you get to rent things, you want the sort of like World Economic Forum, you want a
Yeah.
waffle maker in the
You'll be
morning, it
happy.
comes to you. You'll be happy, exactly, because you are a self-contained unit. You are no longer, there is no such thing as dwelling anymore, because dwelling implies, it implies patriarchy, it implies hierarchy, it
Yeah. It
implies
excludes
ownership.
other people who are not dwelling at the same time.
Exactly. But the thing is, like, you have people that are very not comfortable, like they like to think they're comfortable, but like the anarchist squat, the sort of like trans Reddit moderator, crash house, like you have sort of an idea of communal living that they're trying to like in a way, it's like the secularized like postmodern larping of communitarianism and like the commune squat, right? The sort of the Paris commune idea. But imagine if like in some ways it's like yeah, they're like Eastern Europe was filled with those. There's like a lot of flowery post-Soviet communist ideas, blah blah blah. But I think that in some ways it's like imagine that but only as an individual. You're in your like little pod apartment that like you have to move because of your job every once in a while, and you really don't own anything except for like the clothes on your back, and it's like this rental, this like what do they call it, the World Economic Forum, not the resource based economy, that was the other people there, what do they call it, the new economic oh god, what do they call it, their buzzword,
I don't know. Build back better. There's all sorts.
yeah, but they it's like the system they call it. It's no longer the consumer economy. It's the not the sharing economy. The
Renter.
yeah
Renter
the renter.
hellscape.
Yes. And I think yeah, it's very funny how now there is like a weird sort of like counter discourse by people trying to like aestheticize these spaces, like the liminal space compilations. There's something about that where it's something in combination with that creepy music, the millennial nostalgia, where you have like images of like a, you know, a factory, or like that was reappropriated for like a, a kid's library or whatever. Like it's like you have a picture of the library when you're a kid. You go in there, there's a
Yeah.
big bear in
To
the corner.
me, it
Yeah,
feels like it's kind of like, that uncanny valley feeling. It's
that's what
kind
it
of
is.
something
Yeah,
that a lot
yeah.
of people seek out because these spaces are so unnatural. It's like the only place you see this type, these type of angles and these type of textures in nature is like if you're looking at like Yosemite and like at a cliff face or something like that.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
it doesn't happen. So I guess people are like, I don't know, titillated by whatever
But
it
they're
is.
but they're uncanny and they're natural because you have two forces that are going off in your head at once. The one is that the non-place, the liminal space, like you were saying, is uncanny, it's unnatural, it is something of utility, it lacks a dwelling. But by the mere fact that you have this sort of very particular North American millennial nostalgia over it, it's like you're trying to graft a space of mental dwelling upon them.
Yeah.
That's where you have this contradiction. Of course, I think that if you, like someone like you who grew up in Eastern Europe, right? Like, I think your picture of a non place is different. Like, do you have that same nostalgia when you see the Soviet brutalist apartment? Like, maybe, right? Sort of.
I don't know. I mean, they're really really shitty. So I don't really have there's kind of think like a limit of tolerance of shittiness where nostalgia kind of stops. Where you're like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
actually glad we don't live
Oh
in those.
man, all those kids huffing paint in the basement, paper thin walls. Oh man.
Yeah, yeah. The cockroaches the size of cats. Yeah, no thanks. You can
Can't go to
do
that
not
edge of town
return.
because of the Zingada.
Yeah, I mean, there were,
Yeah.
obviously good things. There's definitely a much deeper sense of community and stuff. Because there was need. You really needed to know your neighbors.
Yeah.
There was a
Yeah.
lot of like a brisk trade in contraband happening, like a lot of stuff. You really needed to know people to survive, and that is something that kind of fell away after communism. And a lot of
Mhm.
people who are nostalgic for communism, because you often hear about these people like, oh, it was better during Ceausescu's times. I mean, one, they were younger. It's easier to think that things were better when you
No,
were
they
younger.
were they were in Gulag. Yeah.
Yeah, people were, their erections were more frequent and lasted longer and things like that. But also, it's that the
Yeah.
fact that people actually had that sense of community, and which now has disappeared. And hierarchies have been completely upended because what the communists did, they brought in a lot of people who used to be pretty much the dregs of society, put them in charge for a
Oh
longer
yeah.
time, and
Yeah.
then when
Yeah.
capitalism came around, obviously, knowing people, nepotism, all that still had a lot of currency, but you also had to start working and be efficient and all this type of stuff. So a lot of the people who were in charge didn't really make the cut, and they're a bit pissed off as
And
well.
you
So
have like a lot of people who were in like Soviet prisons, or who were like you were saying, the refuse, very like, especially young men who are like the sort of like post-Soviet bodybuilder state of like people with a lot of um sambo martial arts and military training, trooping through Eastern Europe, genociding each other. Like it's there's I feel like, yeah, the limits to nostalgia is kind of like at
yeah,
their.
it's one of those things, when war actually happens, when you're confronted, with actual physical violence, when you get punched in the face real hard and you get knocked
Yeah.
out, the theory seldom just kind of leaves your body instantly, and you're just
Yeah.
thrust back into
Yeah.
history. So it's yeah, I think sadly, I feel like
My neighbor is
unfortunately,
committing unbrotherly behavior, so I must go out and
exactly. And I feel, this is a point, to BAP's conception of life in a way. It's like
Mm,
he essentially tries to use theory, to use the conjuring to bring you into that state where you got punched in
right.
the face, and to kind of ground you in that sensation. But unfortunately, I think the punch has to precede, you know.
You know what's
the-
funny? You mentioned you mentioned the erection thing. There is a lot of post-Soviet romanticism around like this sort of like anarchic sexuality that was there for a little time in the margins. But of course, as we know, this, well, under Stalin, under Brezhnev,
suppressed instantly.
yeah, like there was. But, I mean, there's certain like memeish, like yeah, and then the Nazball thing is a meme, but there's certain element that is like, well, Stalin was based, blah blah blah, like the tanky stuff, like, and now you have this sort of like, oh, again, I shouldn't mention them because they're a few of those people are really beneath me. But like, let's say the wholesome Chungus, Ron Paul Maoism of like, the Chinese are based. They're going to bring back the family. The economic structure of the West. Then you have the rival conception, which is of course Eurasianism and like the based right wing against the Atlanticists. But it's funny because when you look at like, as there were pockets within the Soviet Union in the margins in Eastern Europe where you have like these communes that were very much about like the Marcusian free love and shit like that. But you also have these explorations and like the limits to things like brutalism and the non-place. There's this great book about architecture at the very end of the Soviet Union where this guy is a photojournalist, but he went around places like Romania, like Moldova, basically anywhere where architects could like hide and they could just like bill the Moscow for supplies and for like resources. And basically the commissaires like didn't give a shit near the end. They're like, yeah, whatever, do whatever you want, we don't care, right? And so they ended up creating these beautiful modernist architectural features that are very iconic of these regions. So you have like let's face it, very poor, almost third world country nations like Moldova, Ukraine, like you have these nations that are like the people themselves are depressed and they were looted by oligarchs, but yet you have these like incredibly like ahead of their time architectural features that like you look at them and I think he described them as almost like free floating dreams upon the landscape because there was a space, there was sort of a liminality between a society on its last legs and collapsing where you could have some sort of freedom the way that there was, I would say, great artistic free feats in Weimar Germany. You had like some of my favorite artists of all time, like Otto Dix, Breckman, Metropolis, other films. You had the expressionists like Egon Schiele. Uh, who else am I thinking of? Beckman, Otto Dix. There was Kathy Kollwitz. You have like a sort of very stark exploration into the human experience that was very like not what art was during the Kaiser, and also not what art was like during that other regime that came after. But like, but you had like, nowadays I feel that if we truly are in a empire on its eclipse, then maybe there will be a sort of fugitive liminality to art, philosophy, expression. I think BAP is one of them, right? Now,
Yeah.
the problem is that we are experiencing intense and crushing aesthetic homogeneity. Like, because symbols have become images have become dialectical in the sense that Benjamin had this concept of the dialectical image, where like a piece of art or a sort of particular aesthetic image can become operationalized, right? So now we have like the colors. Before it was the masking and the things like that, the sort of biosecurity issue. Now we have like the green. It's not the green. We have
Blue,
the
yellow.
blue and yellow,
Oh,
right? So
yeah.
because, and of course flat design and all that stuff, so because we have this particular form of the aestheticization of politics in all life, it's harder to actually have a breakaway aesthetic movement nowadays, because you could do it in Weimar Germany, you could do it at the end of the Soviet Empire, but if we're truly at the end of the American Atlanticist Empire, which maybe, I mean, well, let's face it, that's kind of copium in some ways. That's doomsday optimism, as we used to say. But if that's true, then should we have not this explosion of subversive aesthetics and philosophy and poetry and so forth? And there are signs of it. I mean, I know with the Passage Prize with Lomez, we were trying to do that. But I think that we have to conquer this pervasive, I would say, aesthetic terrorism that's inflicted upon us by
Yeah.
these, the hideousness of modern life is not like even expressing the hideousness of modern life becomes challenging because it's like this weird, like say no more, but yeah.
No, I agree with you, and I think it kind of brings me back to what you wrote in your essay because it feels like there's a certain self-consuming character to the spaces that we're in, and the spaces where the thousand flowers should be blooming.
Mhm.
And it's I don't know exactly. Like I think you describe it really well. I have a few quotes here from it, but it's like, for example, one is here, like creating an environment where you get your own little circus outside of the big tent circus most people consume, complete with its own spectacles and systems of scapegoating, finding a sort of impotent form of cynical entertainment in the tragedy of others, mutual placing each other in the shark's womb. I wrote about 6 years ago. There's a link to that, where one can only make it out alive by being the most craven and vicious backstabber. And I feel like this is quite apt. I've,
Yeah.
I've seen
Yeah.
this. I've seen this happen a few times, and I feel like the problem that I see is we
The
on
one
the
guy
right.
deserved it, but that's besides the
Yeah, I mean,
besides the point.
who deserves it for what? I think it's also
Yeah.
it's very hard to practice no enemies to the right
Yeah,
when
incredibly hard.
you
Yeah.
know why? Because I also believe in friend enemy, but the problem is because everyone has all of their theory cell cards out, and you have a whole history of things. You have to align on 1,000 different axes, and
Right.
on
Right.
some I am more to the right than you, and on some I will be more to the left than you, and you can always come after me for that. And that's also why the ratchet happens, where, like you said, almost the most craven and vicious backstabbers, and also the people who are willing to push it furthest to the right so that
Right.
they always cover their right flank, and they could always, go after the people who, last week
Right.
were just too soft on, I don't know, decapitation or whatever, and
Female clitondectomy.
exactly. And things
Yeah.
like that. So that's the problem. And the problem is these incentives are baked in, and, people, you could call me like a lib or whatever, but this is the incentive of the system, being the most hard right guy and trying to constantly clean the boundaries of your group, small or big or whatever.
Yeah.
Essentially that's how the system exists, and that's why it keeps collapsing in on itself. I mean, it's collapsed in on itself a few times since I've been here. It's very hard to build any sort of alliances on this thing, like you said, there's no really a thing.
There's a lot of group dynamics that go into it. I think that on the one end there is a need to police each other because in some ways it's impossible to police each other. Um, but the reason why these uh, points of ideological purity come up is that there are a lot of people who like because of like I'm going to write part of it. Actually, I think that I mean, this might turn into a book to tell the truth. There's a lot of different notes I have, a lot of different chapters. But I think that because I hate when they do this bullshit of like, I'm not going to spoil it. You got to go read my other Substack. It's like, no, I'm going to break it down because you're a friend of mine and no nonsense, right?
Nice.
I,
Thank you.
I was going to write about the nature of anonymity. I know, for example, by the way, great podcast with him. Daryl Cooper, he got into some hot water with talking about anonymity. My position is that you have to get to a place in society where you can be like someone like me who, like, let's face it, has nothing to lose. And that's why I post face. Also, like I said, like, here's the thing. If I were to LARP as something online anonymously and someone found my docs, like, imagine if I LARPed as a right wing bodybuilder. Can you imagine the other, like, just
Yeah. Imagine if
BTFOing of
I LARPed
myself?
as a right wing bodybuilder.
Yeah, there you go. Some people speculate that certain big accounts are women, actually. I don't know about that, but like,
I mean,
I
Libs of
think
TikTok is a
Libs of TikTok is a woman. Yeah,
Khazar Milker's Yenta.
exactly. She's quite attractive. Well, I'm not
I
going to get
mean,
into it because I have to
she's
maintain
mid,
the
obviously,
Italian.
but
She's a no, but see, the mid Yenta is like the kryptonite of the online right. Okay. Anyways, no, not getting into that. I think no, but I think you could tell when a woman is online. You could tell by the speech patterns. You could tell by the way they text. I think you can tell. But what I mean is, no, but that's what I mean. Like, if you were to LARP as something online, So I think that you need to create an environment in which you can come out, you can be honest, but we're not there yet. And this is where Martyr made that mistake. We're not there yet. And
Yeah.
to expect that people, and that's like, if you expect people to post face, right? That is like immediate sign that's Fed activity. You're a Fed. And like the Fed accusation is another sort of like discursive tool of panopticism that we all participate in. Now, is there a lot of Feds? Yes, there is. There's tons of Feds, but I think that the policing around who is more right wing and who is a Fed and so forth, the reason why this happens is because you have, okay, people have been burned in the past, people have been doxxed, people have been persecuted. I mean, look at Ricky Vaughn, for instance. Ricky
Mhm.
Vaughn was like the first big mutual, well, apart from Facebook, was the first big mutual that I ever had. And he was always nice to me. And he literally posted a joke where, like, what was it? You vote and you get an Obama phone or some shit. Like, this since like 2010s, right? But the federal government is like legitimately persecuting him and doxing him. And he was doxed by other quote unquote right wingers too, who were, in my opinion, bad faith actors, and they were suspicious and they were like, you know, doing the whole edge posting, naming them sort of stuff, which not going to get into history, but I mean that the reason why it's there and the reason why we participate in this panopticism is because we have been burned, we've been surveilled. There's legitimate feds, but also it's because when you come from a position of, like, let's say, if you're a Lobby anonymous account and you think that, you know, I have to be on the cutting edge of discourse, not this person. Because here's the thing, in my essay series, I'm not claiming that I'm an expert or I'm on the cutting edge of discourse. Like that's stupid, right? Like that I'm too, I guess I'm too humble for that, in the sense that I don't I'm consciously aware of the fact that I probably will bungle certain concepts or ideas up. But like that's just the risk you take with being a cartographer of ideas, right? So the reason it's there is because you have people that have to enforce a sort of ideological purity in terms of the group dynamic, which is different than the way leftists do it. Because with leftism, with contemporary like radical liberal politics, there is the the sort of like group shelling points of discourse. They're enforced by organizations and they have a structure to them, right? But when it comes to one's personal identity, then that is individualized. Now you are this like cyber communist, furry, tanky, anarcho communist, Fuda enjoyer. Oh god, I can't believe I said that word. But like, whereas when it comes to the online right, this is a point that our good friend Default Friend had, right? That when it comes to the online right, the identity becomes the group. It becomes the Pepe the Frog. It becomes the right wing bodybuilder, the Bappian vitalist. It becomes the aesthetic poster, right? The Castizo futurist aesthetic poster, right? And I'm
Yeah.
pretty much friends with a lot of these people, but like it's different in the sense that you have to maintain that group dynamic because you are under such a siege mentality, a Skinner box, you're surveilled, right? So you don't have this sort of like, I am a leftoid, but I'm also an anarcho-communist furry, whatever. Like
Yeah.
there's a different persona there. But when it comes to online right, when you experience these like group dynamics, you have to police each other. And the only way you can police each other, because there's no physical, well, I mean, there's some people maybe, but like there's been like absolutely brutal and gutless people that have doxed each other. But when it comes to like actual like animals of power, the way that like these leftists experience, there is no proper way to really police each other other than saying that you're not sufficiently right wing, or you're a Fed, or you're suspicious, right? Like it very much is like subaltern group dynamics. I hate to say it, like, listen, I know we love LARPing like we're in power. I know we love to think that we're these political architects, but the reality is that we're an avant-garde. That's my point. Like, we're not like this. We can like use the political system like putty in our hands. Like not even Dugin can do that in Russia. Okay, like the whole bullshit about Dugin's Ras Dugan. he's like he's whispering in Putin's ear. No, that's not true, right? At all, right? Um, so we have to police each other in such a way. But then you have people who really don't have anything to lose on the lower end of the spectrum, who it's very convenient to go after the quote unquote big accounts and the celebs, right? And this is the way it works. You have to go after the big names, because the big name, as soon as you get to a certain point where you have an audience and you're aware of the fact you have an audience, then you will stop. Like you experience different levels of criticism, right? As you know, right? So you have to behave yourself in such a way as to deflect certain forms of criticism that are tactical, right? Because let's face it, we're going to get banned at any second, right? Like that doesn't matter. Unless Saint Elon buys Twitter with all of his millions. It's even then, right? So it's like when you're on the sort of when you're coming up in the scene, quote unquote, it's a very effective tool to say that Gio is a gatekeeper. Zero HP Lovecraft is a gatekeeper. BAP is a gatekeeper. Alex Kashuta, you're a woman, so therefore that's double whammy right there. That you're getting into a Fed activity right there.
Mm-hmm.
So
Glowing.
yeah, exactly. You're thirst trapping and all that stuff. So I think that these dynamics are there for a reason, but it's not too dissimilar from the way that avant-garde cultural movements have always conducted themselves, right? And I think that it's important to study it from that lens, because like even BAP would say this, we're not a movement. Like we kind of are, we're kind of friends. We kind of like agree that like, racism and sexism is funny, which I mean, they are objectively, they're funny, but like, oh God, oh no. But it's like the energy that was present in 2016 is no longer there, right? Now, whether something new can come down the pipe, because that's what happens with the avant-garde. You need a very clear balkanization point. You need a sticking point. You need something that can provide energy and fulfillment to people, or else the whole thing's going to collapse, because we don't have those institutional apparatuses to find ourselves in. Because that's why a leftist can like be like a head of a think tank or be a professional activist, but also be like a furry pervert on the internet, because they can sort of they can fulfill different roles, if you will, in life. Whereas when you are a part of an avant-garde, the sum totality of your outsiderness, your outsider status becomes who you are. So now you have to be like, well, I got to differentiate myself. Therefore, I'm more right wing than that guy, right? I'm more racist than that guy, right? Like it's that's what happens in a way. And the thing is, like, I think that you have to realize that when you do post your face online, when you use your real name, we both use our real names. It's like you can't just go and like, I I realized at the beginning of this recording I did the Hail Putler thing, but like I think like that was, listen, I joke, I am liberal. No, but I think like you can't just go off the cock and like, I support violence in the Austrian painter, right? Like you have to be a bit more tactical than that. But until the day that you can be, and that's the real tragedy of it as well, in my opinion, because a lot of these things, like a lot of these ironic sort of like ironic racism, ironic sexism, a lot of it like is hilarious. Like but I think that the problem is you have two responses to that. You have the one side, which is total seriousness. You have to be the utmost pure and serious in your racism or your sexism, to the point where you advocate for, I don't know, female annihilationism or something like that. The abolition of the feminine, right? Or you have this other side, which I think is equally toxic. I know that's a shitty term, but you know what I mean, where it's like everything becomes irony and you're irony poison, and there's no friends in the internet, and the internet is just, jokes. It's no big deal. But when you see that the internet is changing discourse, when online discourse is bleeding into real life, then it's like the goal of this essay series or this book or whatever it turns into is I want to say that, there was an innocence and now we're in the age of experience. Now we have to be serious. We have to confront ourselves in what we're doing. We have to say that if it is true that our ideas can permeate and percolate and sort of like sediment, above the surface, right? It's not just in the platonic cave of ideas, in the internet. Then what are we going to do from there? I think that is what I'm trying to like put forward, is like we have to seriously examine what we are, and we have to look at things in a way in which is like honest, right? And because I do feel that it's important. I feel that this is what I said. Okay, now I'm not going to bring certain people up that I went to war with or whatever, but let me just say that there were certain person who said, fuck it, you people are evil. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to be better than you, blah, blah, blah. Like the whole, like, a woman scorn sort of deal, which is like very effeminate behavior. Like, I hate to say it. It's like, oh, well, I don't like you guys anymore because you're a fucking asshole to me. You called me fat. You know how many fucking people call me fat every day, Alex? Come on. Right? Like, but sorry, I gave away who this person is. But anyways,
I still don't know.
Yeah, don't worry about it. He's beneath your thinking. The point being is that I said when I came back to Twitter, I said in my essay, I don't want to go that way because let's face it, I can't. Because it's like, what am I going to do? I'm going to like start pouring scorn on the people that generally do like, support me and have like, seen me on this journey, if you will, as stupid as that sounds. But at the other end is like I don't want to be that person that says you guys are fucking assholes. You guys aren't going to do anything in life. You're just going to be shit posters forever. I don't want to be that way because I do feel that even if it is just shit posting, even if it is just an affectation of an aesthetic of an avant-garde movement, I still feel that there's enough importance there. There is enough significance within my life and the life of people I interact with to say that, listen, we need a serious examination of what we're doing because I do believe that we, in some ways, have influenced certain things. And that effort, that momentum, that can't just be for nothing, right? Like people, like we talk about like, oh, you're just a shit poster in the internet, but there's like an actual flesh and blood human being behind that anime avatar or whatever, right? Like I feel that they're lost in that sea of ironic shit posting, that they don't realize that yes, it's important. Yes, we're doing something meaningful. And also every other single aesthetic or political group, that's how it started off as well, right? Like that it's no different than, the situationists or whatever. Like it's just a lot of those movements failed. The new age movement failed. It's just like if it fails, it fails. It's just that you have to approach things from, okay, we are putting psychic energy into this thing. What does this thing of ours mean? Right. And so like people, for example, they make fun of Thomas 777, Thomas 777. I know, but I feel like I have to honor the man by saying all of the sevens. People make fun of him all the time for being like, oh, you're just fucking Gen Xer. This is just a LARP. You look stupid with a jacket. But it's like, no, he actually believes in what he's doing. He actually believes that he has a mission, right? And I admire that. And it's like, if it looks hokey and it looks from another time, it's like, have the space to be hokey. Have the space to be sincere. Because let's face it, our enemies to the other side, those, especially those irony leftists, the fucking Chapo people, they despise sincerity, right? And so when you put yourself, it's like, listen, I want to have a family, I want to have a homestead. I mean, the homestead thing is problematic because it's like, a lot of it's a LARP or whatever. But it's like, if you're serious about it, like sincerity is like the kryptonite to these people. That's why they make fun of you. They say that you're, all these problems are just in your head. You know that picture where the guy is like painting the demons and he's like, in the panel, he's like cowering over the demons he painted. Like that's because these people, they genuinely don't believe that they're the ones within the halls of cultural power and that we're the ones who are on the total outside, right? Like that's, so when you're from a position of outsideness, I mean, not the Landian outsideness, but like when you're a total outsider, I feel that you should be afforded a certain level of sincerity in what you're doing. But the problem is that irony has been such an effective tool to us for OPSEC, for just general operation, just to not get banned every single second, I think is another problem. But the problem is that irony is a double-edged sword. It always is. It's like what did Foster Wallace say? His famous quote, um, irony is like a bird that loves his cage. Like, I have you know what I mean. I'm on the fence with these things because I do realize that I post my face out there. Sorry, Alex, I'm just rambling right now.
No worries, no
Yeah.
worries. I'll have to wrap up soon just because
Oh yeah.
it's bedtime, baby situations. We need to wake up at an ungodly hour, so I always wrap a little bit early. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask you the question of the show again. If you have shortly anyone that you might have missed last time that you want to
Oh man.
recommend to the listeners, you recommended a few books during this podcast, but maybe you got one more.
Um. Let's see. Oh God, I love this question, and I'm trying to think of one. Well, I mean, the later works of Heidegger, I think, like building dwelling thinking, is a great essay. But I already said that. Well, I mean, the stuff that Nina Power is working on is quite interesting. What's it called?
Mhm. A
Compact
new book.
Magazine.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Compact magazine. Yeah.
Angelicism, the one Substack account's very good. Oh, I've been reading some Sadie Plant recently. The book Zeros and Ones. I think that's a great. She's probably like the most neglected member of the CCRU. So she was there with like Nick Land and Mark
Oh, okay.
Fisher,
Oh
and she
yeah.
wrote this. She wrote this one book on drugs, but she also wrote this book called Zeros and Ones about basically femininity within the digital age and what the picture of the woman is like. And I think that a lot of there's I think what you're doing, what Default Friend is doing, and my friend Jana, I think like exploring these sort of spaces of what it meant to be a young woman in the internet, the early to mid 2000s, because we know what it's like to be like an incel or whatever on the internet, like these online groups, right? But I think that that's an often neglected space because now we're seeing this like weird, like, often hostile dynamic between like, the rad femmes and the online right and so forth. And I think that to understand the unique ways in which the sort of like hyper reality has affected the woman as well as the picture of the masculine, I think is very fascinating. So Sadie Plant is a good resource. Um, I've been reading more Jack Ellul recently, the
Mhm.
Technological Society, which I think is like probably a good if you're sort of like mind boggled by Heidegger. I think the Technological Society is like a good place to start before you read his essay, The Question Concerning Technology, because there's a lot of similarities there in the way that they approach each other. And also, I've been reading a lot of Paul Virilio recently.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
seems
Go
to
ahead.
be like the very much tied into a little. Yeah, very much. These are all on my reading list. I'm also doing some research for a bigger project in that direction. But yeah, it's
Ooh,
gonna
nice,
take a while
nice.
to see. Yeah, I'm also kind of just at the point where it's I think the return on my shit posting starting to go down, and I feel like need to do something a bit more substantive, kind of like your project as well. So yeah,
I
we'll
think
see where it
Virilio,
ends.
no, Virilio, because Virilio, I think more than anyone is probably one of those like later post-structuralist thinkers that is like super important to understanding what we're experiencing right now. There's this essay that he wrote. Well, actually, the aesthetics of disappearance is like a huge part of one chapter in my series where I talk about like what it means to be an online ship poster. There's also this book by Giorgio Agamben called The Common Community, which, I mean, theory cells in academia will be horrified by this, but Chan culture basically is what he means by a community without an identity. So a lot of like theory
Hmm.
cells in academia, like the fucking Jason Stanley types, they're like, oh my god, that's terrible. But it's I'm trying to make the argument. But Paul Virilio, he wrote this essay called what's it called? A pitiless art. Pitiless art, where he was talking about the sort of like extreme art forms in the 90s and early 2000s. And he said that like the sort of how art reflects society and how we experience this sort of this pitilessness where you have like very extreme feats of contorting the body and contorting being in the work of art. And to me, I feel that a lot of like what we're doing now is almost like a virtual form of pitiless art where the sort of like extreme right wing shit posting in itself is an aesthetics, or rather a sort of an extreme form of ironic truth telling that is pitiless, that is like psychically goring, that is like something that is outside of the norm to such an extreme degree. But I
I
also have
see.
this other essay where I'm working on where I compare, which is again another affect of mine. I compare his essay to deathmatch wrestling. Like I'm a huge wrestling fan, as everyone knows, and I grew up watching what they call deathmatch wrestling, where they use glass and light tubes, and it's like blood everywhere, and ECW, So I view it almost as like a form of performance art. And my good friend Ben Sexsmith has also written
He's
about it as well.
coming on Monday.
Oh, nice. Ask him about wrestling. Because he wrote. I wrote this essay back in the day, back in like 2016. I wrote this essay on deathmatch wrestling, and he actually wrote this essay about it in Antwort, I think the publication is called.
A thwart?
A
Was it?
thwart, yes, yeah. I'm like, you bastard, you stole my insight. He's like, no, your essay really inspired me, Gio. And he's a great dude. I love him. He's a good friend of mine. But no, yeah. So I have a lot of stuff I'm trying to write, a lot of stuff I'm trying to paint. Like I really have to open up that print shop online so people can actually like buy my stuff. Just I
Yeah.
don't know. I
Just
think
you have to get yourself into gear. Get over those
yeah.
mental blockages. I know exactly what you mean.
Well,
It's
like
it's
well,
hard.
you wrote that, yeah, like that one tweet I had where I said that it's the responsibility of grifting that terrifies me. It's like you have to
Yeah. Yeah, and I
be
agreed
beholden
with
to
you. I was
people.
like, yeah, cuz it's the thing is if you really want to take it seriously, I'm kind of also kind of, rolling this at a half I don't have any gated content. I don't have anything. Everything's just like I have early releases, but
Yeah,
everything comes out in the end and I'm like I'm kind of feeling bad if I hold back any episodes. I'm like I don't want to mess with it. I just really don't want to push it that way. I was like, I'm just going to do this as in hobby mode for now, but I feel like if I wanted more people to listen to it, I would also be more involved in actually making more better, more interesting, more research, more,
yeah.
better content. But I'm kind of holding back, just because I'm like,
But that requires time and dedication, and I think that my problem is like I've done a lot of stuff always ostensibly for free, and I feel like because I've been someone who has been under the wheelhouse of other people, I feel that to break out and do my own thing, which I do anyways. Like I have my own YouTube channel,
yeah,
Generate Productions, YouTube.com. I feel like the responsibility of having a Ko-fi, of running exclusive content, of having a print shop, it's terrifying because it's like in a way it's this weird thing where in a way you feel like you're comfortable under the sort of like project of other people because you can identify with it, but at the same time it's like you're pissed off because it's like, oh, no one recognizes me for what I do, right? So it's like this weird
yeah,
dichotomy. But what you're saying, I understand it because when you have like paywalled content, it's like you feel in some ways that your efforts are important enough and sort of like good enough because like that's the stuff you paywall is the good shit, right? Like not the low effort stuff, but it's like it's good enough where it's like what's more important, me getting money for it or like sorry,
people
getting money
listening.
for it, or
Yeah.
like it being released to the world and it becomes its own thing and like maybe it
Yeah,
can
and you kind
inspire
of want to
people.
optimize for reach, and you just
Yeah,
don't think I'm at the point where the podcast is really that huge that I can't get more reach, and don't want to
yeah.
optimize for people actually finding it and listening to it. So anyway, but this is the nitty
Maybe you
gritty
have to
of
go
the
on the
grifty
Blaze
business.
Network or the Ben Shapiro podcast. No, I'm
Oh yeah,
kidding.
yeah, that's the next step up. Yeah, I don't know I don't think I've been to any of the. I think probably more like IDW stuff is the biggest stuff that I've done. Like I
Yeah,
know Rebel Wisdom, Trigonometry, I think was the biggest one. No,
yeah, that was the biggest
New
one. Yeah,
Culture Forums, the one with the biggest view count, which is kind of
yeah,
like a
I saw
British
that.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that
about
was good. I like that one.
blackpilling people about fertility and shit.
But the thing is, you kind of like when you're going bigger platforms, you kind of got to do the greatest hits thing. You
Yeah,
know what
yeah,
I
or
mean?
whatever
Yeah,
they're interested in. Because sometimes, it would really good thing to do is like like now I read your essay and I was like, oh my god, this is really good. Come on, just writing a piece of content, even for Substack on a particular subject. That's how you get a huge, a lot of podcast invites.
exactly.
That's always how. If I whenever there's a lull and me getting invited somewhere, I just like whatever type something
Yeah, I
out
know,
and
I know.
push it into the world.
but that's the thing. It's like you always have the grind is always there. It's just that um I think like people they reacted negatively to the tweet that inspired all of that because it's like, oh, this is about having fun or this is about doing that. I think that the thing is when you do contribute a lot to a certain thing after a while, um then you feel like, yeah, maybe it'd be nice if I was compensated for once in my life. But at the same
Yeah.
time, the grifting thing is different because I feel that there are certain people when you hang around for a long time and you have your own little cabal and you sort of like have your little grift circle, you start to get lazy, you start to get complacent. But also, what is a grifter? A grifter is someone who is putting something out there that they probably don't believe in, or rather, it's not that they don't believe in it, but rather they're doing it in such a way that they know that they're appealing to an audience who will give them mammons or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah,
me,
but
like, I'm terrified.
you really believe in this stuff, and in a way, it's
Ah,
kind of the
well,
opposite of no. I mean, it's kind of the
no,
opposite of
I don't. It's
grifting.
all a lie. I'm actually a
No, but
liberal. No, I'm kidding.
the more you
Yeah.
want your stuff to get out there, the more you kind of build, the more of your stuff you put into it, the kind of
Yeah,
more scared you are to actually ask for compensation for it or to ask you. And
exactly,
that's
exactly.
because you're very invested in it, and if people reject it, or like if you get like 2 Substack subscribers, you're like, the core of my
Oh
being has been
man,
rejected.
and there are posters who I consider like 10 times better than me, and people who have like ideas that are interesting, but yet they probably do only get 50 views on YouTube or whatever, like, or they got 500 followers.
Yeah, but
Like,
the thing is, kind
yeah,
of the grift, the promotion, the being out there, the interacting with people is part of the game. Like for example,
yeah,
there was a whole CA Bond thing, and like the fact that he wrote this book. I'm sure the book is good. Imperium Press. A lot of people like the book. It didn't get a lot of traction because it's quite overwrought. He's not very
mhm,
good at promoting it. It's
yeah,
like, yeah, you were the first level of NRX. Other people are feeding off those ideas. Everyone read Moldbug. After
yeah.
they read Moldbug, they read the Juvenile, and they bypassed your book. And now those ideas are in the mainstream. And the only way he can imagine that happening is just like some mysterious cabal of billionaires pumping money into Zero HP Lovecraft, who is one of the best writers in existence and knows
Yeah.
how to fucking spin a phrase better than anyone. It's not
I
Peter
feel
Thiel.
like
He's not feeding him the lines.
there's certain people, there's a certain group of friends that I feel, not the CA Bond, but I feel like, again, I don't want to mention his name, that probably felt that way. And when BAP's star rose, well,
I'm sure this happens with every
yeah.
wave of this.
And well, I know people that have, yeah, people have like stole. That's the part. But when you put yourself out there, you have to realize that people are going to steal your ideas. It happens all the time.
Of
But
course, but the thing is,
yeah,
especially with like NRX stuff, like I mean,
yeah,
you read the Dark Enlightenment, you read Molbuk, you read the Molbuk reading list. I mean, what are you gonna do? Like literally everyone's reading the same books.
yeah.
Who's on first?
And
Moldbug.
plus,
We're
yeah,
all fucking
in
take it
some
from
ways, I
there.
mean, NRX is done for anyways. In some ways, I feel
Yeah, but
that,
like it's kind of all the stuff that's been spun out of it. It's like,
yeah.
yeah, how
No, but that's the thing.
exactly.
It's like when you have these groups like NRX or the alt right, the movements die, but the ideas, they have attraction. They have a sort of anti fragility to them, and they percolate to the mainstream in some like crazy weird ways. Like, could you imagine a Blake Masters talking about demographic replacement 10 years ago?
No, or like
Right?
technological slavery. That was a good one.
But
Yeah,
so
I mean,
I'm keeping you, Alex. I'm keeping you.
no
We
worries.
could
No, no,
talk
no. It's
for
just like
on this
my
day.
husband. He's like, we need to go to bed, and I'm like, yeah, I know. It's all good. Yeah, because the thing is, baby wakes up at 5:30. We
Oh
have to have
boy. Yeah.
coffee at 5:15 just so we can get ready. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's the only
But we
cap
covered a lot
cap
of
on it.
ground, and I'm happy for that. Yeah.
Yeah, we did. And I'm really happy you came back on. I want to do this again and again and again because this is always fun. You're always like a fountain of infinite information, infinite recommendations, and
I'm a fountain
also
of a lot of other
deep
things as
lore.
well, but
Deep lore about all sorts of stuff that I just wasn't around for, and you know it, and you're the best placed person to do
oh, thank you.
the
Thank you.
cartography of the dissident right, and also you should be a confident grifter. Just secure the bag. People will pay for it. Just go
I
for it,
should I
and
should open up that Ko-fi. I know,
yeah,
like,
open up the Ko-fi. What's that called? Star.
Subscribe star.
Subscribe star.
When you're
Subscribe
banned
star,
on Patreon, subscribe
exactly.
star.
Subscribe star. Substack it. Push the Substack. Just
I might paywall some Substack stuff. If I do write a book, I'll probably paywall the chapters, and then when I release the
exactly.
I know my buddy Apex does that.
Do the early releases. I think that
Yeah,
is a little bit of an incentive for people to pay for it. Takes a little bit of time for them to come out.
Well, I showed to my friend Apex. Apex notes on Substack.
Shout out to Apex. Shout out especially to Gio, a very special guest, return guest, one of the first guests.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Exactly. And also go to Gio's Substack. It is gioscontentcorner.substack.com. He has a YouTube channel as well. And also the Twitter, of course.
Yeah,
which is
soon print shop art seller's website.
Exactly.
Hopefully.
Exactly.
And go and subscribe to Subversive. Alex Kashuta, listen, as an old hat, Alex Kashuta is not a fad. She's not a female fed. She's not the fed that loves you. There was a great song by Perfect Circle, The Nurse Who Loved Me, The Fed Who Loved Me. That could be a great remix. She's not a fed. She's genuine. Oh God, you better not be a fed. I'm gonna have fucking egg on my face.
That would be really awkward, Gio.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't you vouch for me. Don't have to vouch for me. We'll see. This
has been high energy, but you have to go to bed. Yeah, the husband demands it.
The husband demands it. I mean, how can I be trad? Like just letting my husband just text me, like, "What are you doing?" No, I'm just kidding. No, it's all chill. Everything's fine. People will go to bed very soon, and we shall wake up refreshed.
All right.
And that was it. Thanks again, Gio. It's awesome to have you on.
Tip my hat off to you, my good friend.